I'm going to normalize being a bad bitch with depression because we out here, okay? Representation matters. I am a depressed extrovert, though. That's unacceptable because my whole personality is like, everybody check out how sad I am. Don't nobody want to do that. I will get real with y'all, though. Over the pandemic, it's the first time in a long, long time I've thought about getting back on antidepressants, okay? I haven't been on antidepressants in a decade. I'm older than you think. Do not ask, okay? I told my friends this, and they were really supportive. They just had a few questions like, okay, you were on antidepressants before. What did it feel like? Like, why do you want to get back on them? And I was honest. Being on antidepressants feels like your brain is being gentrified. That's what it feels like. It really does. Because, like, the property value has gone up, but I don't recognize this place. Like... Who fixed the sidewalk? Finally, wow, okay, interesting. This is white women jogging around my brain at night. Streets is dead.
Good morning. It's Thursday, Broken News Thursday, June the 20th, first day of summer. And this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer, the patriotic song, and we will have the patriotic shorts, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand, the 33 Strategies of War, and Broken News. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. Now, Stuart Varney with the headlines.
Guys, thank you so much. Fantastic show today. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you again tomorrow. Stay with us. Varney & Company's up next. Stu, take it away.
Good morning, Maria. Good morning, everyone. The markets reopen after the Juneteenth break, and the top story is again incredible NVIDIA. Here is the pre-market quote. Yes, NVIDIA is up again almost $5, reaching $140 a share. It is now solidly the most valuable publicly traded company, well over $3.3 trillion. Just about everything else is up as well. The Dow actually is going to be down about 40 points, but the S&P up about 10, and look at that NASDAQ, almost certain to hit new highs because of NVIDIA and the continuing rally in big tech. Little change for interest rates. We have the 10-year yield coming in around 4.28%. That's up a little. The 2-year treasury around 4.75%. That's up as well. Bitcoin, $65,000 last time we checked. Still there now. Oil firm at $81 a barrel, almost 82. Gas, no change. $3.45 for regular. Diesel up 2 cents, $3.80. Politics. New Fox polls show a 3-point shift to Biden in head-to-head matchups. Trump still leads, but only just, and he's lost ground with women. The president goes into deep debate prep mode. He's heading to Camp David, where he'll conduct mock debates. Trump's debate prep will be holding policy meetings with advisors. The CNN presidential debate is 1 week from today, and it will be simulcast on Fox. On the show today, the left creates a climate of fear. If Trump is re-elected, the ladies of The View think they'll be locked up and taken off the air. It is Supreme Court decision day. We don't know which decisions will be handed down. The most important for politics is the question of Trump's immunity. What are the limits? No matter what the decision, Trump's trials and the election will be affected. Look at this. The climate crowd sprays 4,500-year-old British iconic monument Stonehenge with orange paint. The result is outrage and a sharp erosion of support for green policies. It is Thursday, June 20th, 2024, the summer solstice. It is the longest day of the year. Varney & Company, about to begin.
And that was Stuart Varney with the headlines. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Stuart Varney's My Take.
And now this. Lock her up. Remember that from the first Trump presidency? The crowd wanted to lock up Hillary Clinton. President Trump could have tried to do it, but he didn't. This is what he told Fox and Friends.
They all said lock her up, and I felt, and I could have done it, but I felt it would have been a terrible thing. And then this happened to me. And so I may feel differently about it.
There was a slight hint of retribution there right at the end. The left jumped on that. It's what they need to stoke a climate of fear. Look what he's going to do if he gets back in. All right, here are our old favorites from The View.
There's been a lot of talk.
And I'm going to go ahead and stop it there. Again, this is the typical trick of the left. They don't want what they've done to Donald Trump to be visited upon them because they've opened the door. Make no mistake about it. The left has created this climate of fear, if you want to call it that, by going ahead and prosecuting somebody for political reasons instead of for legal reasons. So now, if Donald Trump or any other Republican gets in office, they can go ahead and do the same thing and prosecute Democrats for political reasons. And they're terrified of that, and they should be. But the problem is, instead of blaming themselves, instead of looking in the mirror and saying, gee, maybe we shouldn't have done this. Maybe we shouldn't have prosecuted Donald Trump. Maybe we shouldn't have trumped up charges, so to speak, in order to get Donald Trump off of the political playing field. Instead of doing that, they blame, Donald Trump. Oh, Donald Trump is the problem. He's the one that we should be afraid of. No, what we should be afraid of is a government that thinks it has rights. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the patriotic shorts.
He was a medic in the Army's 76th Infantry Division and had outlived 8 medics in his company. His unit had just crossed the Rhine River and was engaged in fierce house-to-house combat in Camberg, Germany, just weeks before the war would end. He was Gregory Kirchner, and it was pouring rain in the middle of the night when he heard a scream for help. A soldier had stepped on a landmine, his leg blown off at the hip. As the soldier lay bleeding to death, he gasped his final words to Kirchner. "My name is Glenn Jones. My wife is expecting. Please tell her I love her." Kirchner would spend the next 60 years searching for Glenn's wife, and with the help of the VA, he finally made contact with her just months before he passed away. "It was like hearing from Glenn himself," said a teary Virginia when she got the unexpected call from Greg. "It was a true miracle. Greg is an angel." As a teenager, he had a flourishing career as a radio actor, known for his impersonations. He was also valedictorian of his high school class and was fluent in 12 languages, including Chinese, Russian, and Korean. He graduated from Columbia University at age 19 and earned a master's degree from Yale at 21. His name was Sorrel Book, and before the world knew him as the scheming and corrupt Boss Hogg on the Dukes of Hazzard, he served as a counterintelligence officer in the U.S. Army during the Korean War. His specialty was interrogating captured Korean and Chinese soldiers, reviewing transmissions between China and Korea, and debriefing returned and escaped American prisoners of war. Book was also a topography expert, analyzing terrain that was favorable for advancing versus defending, a critical role during the war. "I'm just an ordinary guy from Buffalo," is all he would say about his time in the Army. "Sorrel was the most gracious and humble man I've ever met," said Duke's co-star James Best.
When Benito Mussolini met Hitler for the first time, he was uncharacteristically awkward.
Oh, nice Miller. Oh, nice Miller. Yeah. No, you said that. Oh.
Some argued he seemed desperate to be friends with the Fuhrer.
So maybe after we could go get ice cream. You know, they have mint. What? You get ice cream? No, I said ice green. Your eyes are so green. That's more intense. That's worse, actually.
Mussolini was forced to deny he'd become obsessed with the Germans.
They have not become obsessed with Hitler, his wife Eva Anna Paula Braun, or his 7.5-year-old German Shepherd called Blondie. Rumors that I have planned a candlelit dinner for him in my house tonight are untrue. And so zoom in. I told you not to zoom out. Zoom in.
Eventually, Mussolini was forced to tone down the relationship when his speechwriters started making fun of him.
Hitler will be entering from the rear, and to help with naval warfare, I will provide a strong flow of seamen for this. Okay, not funny? I see what you've done. Take that back, please. Pathetic.
And that was the Patriotic Shorts. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now a little bit of motivation.
Judge a person not by what they accomplished, but what they had to overcome for their accomplishment. People that are hungry have zero excuses for not pursuing their dreams. And they come back again and again and again. They operate like Willie Jolly, who said that a setback is a setup for a comeback. I've got a saying, if life knocks you down, try and land on your back, because if you can look up, you can get up. Get up. I'm training people to get into their greatness, to begin to develop the courage to pursue dreams beyond their comfort zones. Because in order to do something you've never done, you've got to become someone you've never been. When you're pursuing your greatness, you don't know what your limits are, so you act like you don't have any. There's never a shortage of opportunities. It's just a shortage of thinking. Because some things are taught and some things are caught.
Dirk, why'd you take your pants off? My balls was hot.
These are the moments Manscaped lives for.
The Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra.
And some things are caught. When I was in the 5th grade, they put me back from the 5th grade into the 4th grade. I failed again in the 8th grade. I have no college training. So being identified and labeled as DT, the dumb twin, it gave me a lot of things to overcome. And so there was no one to dispute what was said about me, and I bought it. Even if you are told a lie, faith comes by hearing and hearing and hearing. You hear it often enough, it becomes your reality. Perception, not challenge, becomes real for you. someone's opinion of you does not have to become your reality. So if you can track failure, you can also track success. You have greatness in you. I don't know you, but here's what I know based upon my own experience. You have greatness in you, that you have the ability to do more than you could ever begin to imagine. You have greatness in you. There's a presence in each and every one of us that waits and listens to the voice of the genuine in yourself. It will be perhaps the only God you will ever have or hear. And if you cannot hear it, all of your life will be spent on the ends of strings that somebody else pulls. When you recognize your greatness, no one will ever pull those strings. You are different. You were created on purpose with a purpose to manifest that purpose through you. You will never exercise authority and dominion over your life until you exercise authority and dominion over what you are not. Most people go through life living a lie that has been told about them. There's something in you that's greater than your circumstances. There's something in you that's greater than the adversities that you're facing. In life, you're either in a problem, just left one, or headed toward one. You have greatness in you. When you're pursuing your greatness, you live from a place of the willingness to live life courageously, to be willing to take chances, to become a risk taker, to make impact, to go beyond believing to knowing, to lean not unto your own understanding, to feel within yourself there's some cause, there's something that's bigger than me, but I'm never alone in facing this. There's a presence that will never leave me nor forsake me. And that when you step into that place, more of thee, less of me, that there's a place where we can go within ourselves. There are things that we can accomplish, things that we can do, that eye has not seen, ear has not heard, nor is it in the heart of mankind what God has in store for us. When we surrender life to me, when you're pursuing your greatness, you find something that you love, that you surrender to that something gives you life, and that you turn yourself over to that and allow yourself to be used by life. That, to me, is what greatness is. When I was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and I was pondering about my life, am I going to beat this? And I was reading his words for comfort, and he said, the ideal situation for a man or woman to die is have family members praying with them as they cross over. But imagine being on your deathbed and standing around your bed, the ghost of the dreams, the ideas, the abilities given to you by life, but you, for whatever reason, you never pursued those dreams. You never acted on those ideas. You never used those gifts, and there they are looking at you with large angry eyes saying, we came to you, and only you could have given us life, and now we must die with you forever. And the question is, if you died today, what dreams, what ideas, what gifts will die with you? As I face inevitable death, what in the meaning and purpose of my life that will not be undone or destroyed when I'm gone?
And that was a little bit of motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Daily Stoic.
Part 1. The Discipline of Perception. January. Clarity. Control and choice. The chief task in life is simply this: to identify and separate matters so that I can say clearly to myself which are externals not under my control, and which have to do with the choices I actually control. Where then do I look for good and evil? Not to uncontrollable externals, but within myself, to the choices that are my own. Epictetus, Discourses 2.5.4 through 5. The single most important practice in Stoic philosophy is differentiating between what we can change and what we can't, what we have influence over and what we do not. A flight is delayed because of weather. No amount of yelling at an airline representative will end a storm. No amount of wishing will make you taller or shorter or born in a different country. No matter how hard you try, you can't make someone like you. And on top of that, time spent hurling yourself at these immovable objects is time not spent on things we can change. The recovery community practices something called the Serenity Prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Addicts cannot change the abuse suffered in childhood. They cannot undo the choices they have made or the hurt they have caused. But they can change the future through the power they have in the present moment. As Epictetus said, they can control the choices they make right now. The same is true for us today. If we can focus on making clear what parts of our day are within our control and what parts are not, we will not only be happier, we will have a distinct advantage over other people who fail to realize they are fighting an unwinnable battle.
And that was The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
Why is there something rather than nothing? It's an ancient perennial question. The point I'd like to make is it's a properly philosophical question. It's not a scientific question, not a question that can be adjudicated by physics, chemistry, or astronomy, because they're always looking at events and objects and measurable states of affairs within a finite contingent system. And that's fine. That's what the sciences are built to do. But when you ask the question we just asked, that's not a deeper level scientific question. It's a different type of question that takes you out of the epistemological framework of the sciences and introduces you to a higher epistemological framework. One of the problems we face is scientism. One of its dimensions is a tendency to see philosophy as primitive science. They wish they could do real science. What they're doing is some kind of underdeveloped science. No, what they're doing is something qualitatively different than what the sciences do. The collapsing of all the epistemic orders into the scientific is one of the marks, negative marks of our time.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Quote, in this country, few people care to advocate, to defend, or even to understand capitalism, yet fewer still wish to give up its advantages. So, if they are told that capitalism is compatible with controls, with the particular controls which further their particular interests, they go along with it, and they go along with those programs, in the comforting belief that the results will be nothing worse than a modified capitalism, unquote. And that's from the chapter, The New Fascism, Rule by Consensus, from the book Capitalism, The Unknown Ideal. And back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little bit of housekeeping. First, I wanted to alert my listeners in the United States to a new hotline. It's called 988. I was made aware of this hotline yesterday by a doctor who is letting me know about this and wanted me to spread the word. And it is a suicide prevention hotline. And so the way it works is that you call this, you can call it or text. If you don't want to make the phone call, then you can text. And you will immediately be talking to a professional, a psychiatric or psychological professional who will be able to help you immediately. So you're not going to be put on hold or have to go through any administrative rigmarole or whatnot. So, and this is in the United States nationwide, 988. So if you or somebody else is feeling suicidal, call 988. So I want to get that out to everybody. So the other thing is then for tomorrow, today being Thursday, but tomorrow we're going to have, instead of the Police Craft Friday, because that book is complete, we've finished it, there's going to be a new book about paramedics. And so that's going to be for tomorrow. And so that kind of wraps up my housekeeping end of things. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the 33 Strategies of War.
From The Complete Upmanship by Stephen Potter. How to be one up. How to make the other man feel that something has gone wrong, however slightly. The life man is never caddish himself, but how simply and certainly often he can make the other man feel a cad, and over prolonged periods. The Art of Political Warfare by John Pitney Jr. There are other ways to fray nerves. During the Gulf War, President Bush kept pronouncing the name of the Iraqi leader as Saddam, which loosely means shoeshine boy. On Capitol Hill, the ritual mispronunciation of a member's name is a time-tested way to rattle opponents or haze newcomers. Lyndon Johnson was a master of the practice. When Johnson was Senate Majority Leader, writes J. MacIver Weatherford, he applied it with junior members who voted the wrong way. While slapping the young chap on the back and telling him he understood, Johnson would break his name into shreds as a metaphorical statement of what would happen if the disloyalty persisted.
And that was the 33 Strategies of War. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, if you're a Democrat, you should be voting Republican because the general distraction afflicting contemporary society does not allow the emphasis and energy of rage to arise. Rage is the capacity to interrupt a given state and make a new state begin. Today, it is yielding more and more to offense or annoyance, having a beef, which proves incapable of effecting decisive change. In consequence, one is annoyed even by the inevitable. Annoyance relates to rage as fear relates to dread. In contrast to fear, which concerns a determinate object, dread applies to being as such. It grips and shakes the whole of existence. Nor does rage concern a discrete state of affairs. It negates the whole. Therein lies its negative energy. It represents a state of exception. Increasing positivization makes the world poor in states of exception. Back in a minute. Thank you. So this is Broken News. Let's see. Why the Media Rage Machine Divides America and How to Fight Back by Chris Starwalt. Now, this chapter 3, let's see, what does it say here for the title of chapter 3? Bubble Trouble. How the news business, Bubble Trouble, how the news business lost contact with the real world. So that's chapter 3. But chapter 3 is over an hour long, and that would double the length of my podcast. I'm not interested in doing that, so I'm going to play only half of this. So this is the first half of chapter 3 from Broken News.
Chapter 3. Bubble Trouble. How the news business lost contact with the real world. One ought to recognize that the present political chaos is connected with the decay of language, and that one can probably bring about some improvement by starting at the verbal end. If you simplify your English, you are freed from the worst follies of orthodoxy. George Orwell, Politics and the English Language, 1946. For the sake of some of our left-of-center readers, let's pause here to talk about partisan and ideological bias. There's no need, of course, to convince most right-of-center readers. The liberal media bias is an article of faith for most Republicans. And while right-wingers often overstate both the quantity and consequences of bias, that is not the same as saying it doesn't exist. Europeans routinely overestimate the prevalence of gun violence and murder in the United States, for example. But the United States still has a murder rate nearly 4 times higher than the European Union, according to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. To talk sensibly about the way news media works and doesn't work, let's start with some baselines on bias. Is the following headline biased? Why trust us is often a reason not to trust the government. Most certainly, but how? Sometimes it's easy to see the presence and direction of bias just by a headline. Consider this from right-wing site The Federalist. Encanto's Luisa is way too beefy for a woman. The headline writer wants you to know not only that the story is biased, but that it is biased in an anti-feminist direction. By being mean about a character in a children's movie, the headline writer also wants to prime readers for an emotional response and, a click. That's bias and salaciousness as a business technique. And even the capybaras in Encanto would know enough to discern such obvious clickbait. But back to why trust us is often a reason not to trust the government. You should know that the headline flew with an analysis flag, which is a way for news outlets to say that what follows is the work of a putatively objective reporter, but one who is going to cut a few corners in the name of better illuminating a subject. Or maybe just that the reporter filed a self-centered piece of junk at deadline on a Friday, and the editors figured it would be easier to label it as ground beef than to try to cut it into steaks. News analysis really can be good and helpful. Indeed, much of my daily writing that I like best is analysis, which lives in a gray area between straight news and opinion. It's sort of like writing the news, but with all of the adjectives switched on. I try to avoid having opinions about what politicians or partisans should do, even as I offer my opinions about how they are doing it. There are more than enough media mouths commenting on what they think other people should be doing. Plus, prescriptive opinions distort our ability to see things clearly. If I decree that so-and-so should do such and such, I am emotionally and socially invested in the outcome. I will be less likely to see events as advantageous for the opposing side or disadvantageous for my own stated position. That prevents me from doing my favorite thing of all, figuring out what comes next. I'm always trying, and usually failing, to determine where we are politically in relation to our past and future. Hard and fast pronouncements are sometimes needed, but generally they make that work even more difficult. Analysis fits the bill better for the kind of work I like to do and allows me some zhuzh in the headlines, like we saw with the one about not trusting the government. You've probably guessed that the headline is a misdirection play. It's from the New York Times on a piece venting the outrage among many journalists at the civilian casualties from American military action. It's a good thing for reporters to be skeptical of government claims about military action, but that perspective is stereotypically more left-wing than right-wing. When I see a headline or a segment about why not to trust the government, that's usually much more of a right-wing concept, often depicted in a negative, kooky way. The headline, therefore, works because it is interesting to see at the liberal New York Times, modest clickbaiting, and then takes you to a story that is about something completely different than what a reader might expect. So is why trust us is often a reason not to trust the government a biased headline? Yeah, kinda. In which direction? It depends on how you look at it. Try putting that into a bias detection machine or scoring it in some objective way, Like most things in life, we can only try to use our best, but always imperfect judgment. But that will never stop social scientists from trying. A 2020 study from a group of respected political scientists claims there is no liberal media bias in which news stories political journalists choose to cover, which is kind of a silly thing to explore. Most of the stories that political journalists cover are determined by events, and most political journalists follow stories like little kids playing soccer. They form a clump and then chase the ball wherever it goes on the field. Showing a lack of bias in story selection, especially if one takes a capacious view of what the topic for a story is, doesn't tell us much. How these stories are written, which candidates or parties are cast positively or negatively, and which personal attributes are associated with which candidates would be far more indicative of bias. But that's too subjective for reliable, uniform research. If a dozen reporters cover a candidate debate and 9 file stories saying that the Republican candidate outperformed the Democrat, is that bias, accuracy, groupthink, or something else? Some of each? I don't mean to pick on their work, which is very well done, and as we will soon see, parts of it are very useful. But political scientists quickly outrun their supply lines when it attacks subjective targets. Bias is a highly subjective characteristic in coverage, and social science has mostly been unable to study it empirically. The professor's method, so you know, involved sending fictitious campaign emails to journalists. The carefully crafted spoofs invited them to sit-down interviews with state legislative candidates to see whether they responded at higher rates to campaigns of candidates of one party or another. I know I am in many ways not indicative of journalists as a whole. Thank heaven for small favors. But I wouldn't participate in a sit-down interview with an unknown candidate for state legislature to see The Last Supper with the original cast. Unless you're specifically covering the State House, you would run for dear life from press secretaries like those who would send such an email. Yet again, the effort to scientifically prove or disprove bias on an industry-wide scale ends up in a shrug. But the work of political scientists Hans Hassel of Florida State University, John Holbein of the University of Virginia, and Matthew Miles of Brigham Young University is useful to our effort to be clear-eyed about bias in the press. Their study involved a massive survey of political journalists across the country that netted 1,511 responses. While that was a response rate of just 13.1%, when you remember that the typical response rate for a high-quality national survey of the general population is typically under 10% these days, it doesn't seem so bad. We should remember, though, that there's going to be considerable self-selection bias in a survey like this. We know that response rates to polls among Republicans in the larger public are below those for Democrats. So it stands to reason that the sample of journalists willing to respond to an email survey about their political leanings might also tilt left. But how far? In the survey, nearly 8 in 10 respondents said they have at least leaned toward one party. Of those who admitted a personal preference, 78% of respondents described themselves as liberal, and 78.2% described themselves as Democrats. Just 22% described themselves as conservative, and 21.8% said they were Republicans. Even if we allow for dramatically different response rates, does anyone see a subpopulation of journalists who are Twitter users too? And yes, journalists on Twitter need to follow individuals with whom they don't agree, which may skew follows left too. I don't know how much, but it certainly made me think that it would need to be a very profound kind of number in a study like that to take significant notice. So how about these apples? A full 78.1% of journalists are more liberal than the average Twitter user. Moreover, 66% are even more liberal than former President Obama. 62.3% are to the left of the median Senate Democrat in the 114th Congress, and a full 14.5% are more liberal than Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, one of the most liberal members of the House. Even among the left-leaning world of Twitter, and even among Democrats, political journalists on Twitter are way, way left of center. Whatever the partisan response rates were to their decoy emails for State House candidate announcements, there's no question of the strong bent of political journalists personally to the left. All that we know about human nature and unconscious bias tells us that has to have implications for how stories are covered. I'm not talking here about the volume or intensity or even the specific direction of the left-leaning bias, just that it exists. If you still want some hard numbers for what is an inherently subjective measurement, though, check out the famous 2005 study, A Measure of Media Bias, by economists Tim Grosclose, now of George Mason University, and Jeff Milio, now head of the economics department at the University of Missouri. Grosclose and Milio looked at the 200 think tanks most commonly cited by major news outlets and lawmakers. They plotted ideological scores for the think tanks based on the approving mentions by members of Congress in their output of speeches and other communications. The researchers then synced that up with the lawmakers' ideological scores from the left-wing Americans for Democratic Action to generate a value on a scale of 0 to 100. 0 being the most conservative, 100 being the most liberal. The median score for a House member in 2003 was 39. The Heritage Foundation, then a bulwark of conservatism, got a score of 6, while the Children's Defense Fund, a close ally of Hillary Clinton, got a 77. The researchers then looked at citations of the think tanks in news reporting, not opinion pieces, letters to the editor, or editorials, at a number of major outlets from 1990 to 2003, including The New York Times, Time Magazine, CBS Evening News, USA Today, NBC Nightly News, ABC's Good Morning America, PBS NewsHour, The Washington Post, NPR's Morning Edition, ABC World News Tonight, and Fox News's Special Report. Grosclose and Milio then generated a score for each show or publication. Only Special Report landed to the right of the median ideological score for House members with a 27, 12 points to the conservative side of the center line. Every other publication or show was to the left except Good Morning America, which back then sat smack dab on the median score of 39. The New York Times, Time Magazine, CBS Evening News, USA Today, and NBC Nightly News all came in about 25 points left of the average. The Washington Post, Morning Edition, and ABC World News Tonight were less tilted, all about 15 points to the left. Those shows and publications have all changed dramatically since then, as have the think tanks. So these scores don't do us any good in judging who is more fair today. But what it does tell us is that for a lengthy span in recent history, there was a pronounced leftward slant in almost all of the most important sources in the mainstream press. You can quibble with the methods and the scores for individual outlets, but this is as good an effort as I have seen to make the subjective estimation of media bias into some kind of objective measurement. I'm sorry, conservatives, for what must seem like a belaboring of what to you is an obvious point. But I think this is such an important concept for understanding of the media industry, it's necessary to take some time on this for our liberal friends. Even if a person of the left is not willing to accept completely that there is substantial left-leaning or democratic partisan bias in mainstream news, maybe they would at least allow why so many people think there is. Gallup and the Knight Foundation, the heavyweight journalism nonprofit group, started collaborating in 2018 on the American Views Project to measure public opinions about the news. Their 2020 report, entitled Trust, Media, and Democracy, surveyed more than 20,000 American adults to ask about how the news media delivers on its democratic mandate for factual, trustworthy information. The answers were even more depressing than you might have feared. 65% of Americans, including 57% of Democrats and 75% of Republicans, say the increasing number of news sources reporting from a particular point of view is a major problem. A majority of Americans believed inaccurate news to be intentional. 52% said because the reporter is misrepresenting the facts. 28% said they were making them up entirely. 74% said news organizations they distrust are trying to persuade people to adopt a certain viewpoint. Part of what's happening here is what I call the not my guy effect. It's what allows for Congress to consistently have national approval ratings somewhere below those for ringworm, but an incumbency retention rate of more than 90%. All the other guys are a bunch of four-flushing no-account crooks, but not my guy, says Joe Matadots or Susie Cream Cheese. I met him at the charity softball game at the Elks Club a couple of years ago. He's not like the rest of them. So it is with the news. 64% said they were concerned about bias in the news that other people were getting, but only 34% were worried about their own news being biased. Even so, the fact that 65% of adults, including a stout majority of Democrats, think that biased news is a major problem for the country is, unto itself, alarming. And the fact that they see the bias as mostly intentional steers us away rather than toward addressing the problem. The belief that bias is the result of malign intentions is another example of fundamental attribution error at work. Intentional bias certainly happens, especially at outlets that profit by the click or minutes of viewership. We're also not talking about, say, those who dangle headlines about the unacceptable masculinity of female cartoon characters. Opinion journalism makes better clickbait explicitly because it is not trying to be fair. The question we're addressing is about bias in the news. And in the world of mainstream news, left-of-center outlets overwhelmingly predominate. There are several places on the conservative side that do scrupulous reporting, and even some that mostly try to keep opinion out. But that leaves you with just a handful of sites, like my own journalistic home, The Dispatch, maybe a few hours a day on Fox News, and not much else. Gallup Knight's finding that 57% of adults see either a great deal or a fair amount of bias in the news source they rely on most often tells me that understanding goes well beyond GOP anti-press obsessives. I think they're right to be worried, but that the common perception that the slant is mostly intentional is wrong. Many Republicans seem to think that reporters and editors see all of the points of view and then choose the ones that favor Democrats or liberal positions. I'm not saying that never happens, but the far more common problem in my experience is obliviousness. Republicans, people from Republican parts of the country, or even people who match the demographic characteristics of typical Republican voters are far less likely to go into journalism and media than other fields. The roots of the obvious left-wing bias in the news is more the product of who is doing that work than any intentional bias. Our tendency is to see deficiencies as characterological rather than situational. Back again to fundamental attribution error. So it may be hard to offer that benefit of the doubt to those who one believes have wronged his or her own tribe. But stick with me on this, conservatives. Big-time newsrooms tend to be liberal monocultures, and most journalists grew up in similar environments. They're not cheating their audience so much as they are blind to the problem. If anything like 78% of political journalists are left-leaning, as the story selection study showed, Republicans are not participating in the news business at anything like the rates of their Democratic peers. Gatekeeping is a factor here, no doubt. As in all kinds of work, the people who achieve success are likely to hire individuals who share their worldviews and backgrounds. That has always contributed to the leftward lean in hiring, going back to the widespread adoption of professional journalism in the middle of the previous century. But as newsrooms have worked hard to be more culturally inclusive and diverse, the tilt has almost necessarily been amplified. If you are a woman who is part of an ethnic minority, grew up in the urban Northeast, went to Columbia Journalism School, and got your start with an alternative progressive publication, human nature dictates that you will see job candidates with similar attributes as superior to others. It works that way for white dudes in finance from Connecticut who went to Wharton and in every other field. Even if you're not making a conscious choice about the political leanings of a new reporter, your own implicit bias about a candidate's other characteristics will tend to set ideological boundaries. Female, minority, urban, Ivy League conservatives exist, but probably in about the same proportions as male, white, rural SEC liberals. The same innate biases that kept big-time journalism almost entirely the realm of white men for so long work upon every new ruling class, just like all elites in all places, in all times. Our own egos prove to be unconquerable. Indeed, efforts to defeat implicit bias in hiring when it comes to race and gender no doubt push newsrooms farther still to the left. If newsrooms were already overwhelmingly white and liberal, setting hiring quotas to emphasize individuals from groups that are left of the national average would make it even harder to make room for reporters whose backgrounds could help organizations battle against left-wing groupthink. My guess is that gatekeeping is not the main driver of the sharp tilt to the left among reporters, editors, and producers. I think the biggest factors come down to political geography and people following their hearts in a free society. First, let's think about the red and blue map and where reporting jobs are and where they are going. It will surprise no one to learn that as local newspapers have withered or died, it has intensified a pre-existing problem of geographical and cultural isolation for those who work in news. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 92% of journalists worked in metropolitan areas in 2011, an increase of nearly 20 points from 50 years before. The Atlantic's Andrew McGill estimated in the wake of the 2016 election that 13% of all journalists worked within the less than 23 square miles of the island of Manhattan. Here's Politico's Tucker Doherty and Jack Schaefer writing in 2017. Today, 73% of all internet publishing jobs are concentrated either in the Boston, New York, Washington, Richmond corridor or the West Coast Crescent that runs from Seattle to San Diego and on to Phoenix. The Chicagoland area, a traditional media center, captures 5% of the jobs, with a paltry 22% going to the rest of the country. The result, they say? 72% of all internet publishing or newspaper employees in 2017 worked in a county won by Hillary Clinton. But Clinton only won about 16% of all counties. I know that the population is far from evenly distributed. More than half of American citizens live in fewer than 5% of counties, according to census data. But that doesn't in any way minimize the social effects of having 3/4 or more of journalists working and mostly living in blue America. Yes, people often move from red counties to blue counties for work, but the extreme urban concentration of the news media surely has a considerable effect. There is an obvious competitive advantage for aspiring journalists from urban, typically democratic places, since distance and relocation are factors as people consider their career paths. Then there is the power of social environment and the coalitional instinct. Peer and friend groups exert enormous power over individual perceptions. And if the universe of potential peers and friends where you live is only 20% or so Republican, there must be some effect in terms of self-censorship and groupthink. A 2018 Pew study found that newsrooms were 8 points more male than the workforce in general, 61% compared to 53%. The same study found that newsrooms were 12 points whiter than America's workforce as a whole, 77% to 65%. But some of the gaps shrank sharply among younger workers. The gender gap disappeared entirely among journalists under 30, even as the whiteness rate remained consistent for all newsroom workers under 50. Let's compare those characteristics with a typically conservative or Republican sector, the energy industry, and then look more closely at a group of comparable size to the news industry, those in the fuels sector. That's the group that includes the major extractive industries like coal, natural gas, and oil. At the end of 2018, 1.1 million Americans were employed in the fuel sector, 79% of whom worked in oil or natural gas. That group was just 24% female compared to 39% in newsrooms in the Pew study, and roughly even male-female split in the workforce overall. The degree of whiteness was about the same between journalism and fuels, landing in the mid-70s. But think of the political implications of just the gender numbers alone. According to the AP VoteCast survey of 2020 voters, 58% of white men voted for Donald Trump. If the miners, riggers, drillers, and the rest of the fuel sector are almost twice as likely to be male as the national workforce, and about as white as the workforce as a whole, what might we guess about how that sector voted? Not a lot of Elizabeth Warren love over there, my friends. Did they get into the business because they were conservative? Did they become Republican because of the perceived economic advantages for their industry? Does social pressure play a role? Do the places where there is mining, rigging, and drilling tend to be more red than blue? Do people in these industries tend to hire people like them? Yep. I am, so far, the only coal salesman's son I have ever, to my knowledge, encountered working in national political journalism. People who grow up in places like Ohio County, West Virginia, and with families in the energy industry perhaps don't typically think about journalism jobs or find the work appealing. Indeed, given the terrible opinion we know Republicans have of the news media, there would be an obvious and strong disincentive for people from very Republican places from wanting to work in the news business. You probably know intuitively, or by experience, that people in the news business are far to the left of people in coal, oil, and gas. That's no surprise. But I want you to think about the demographics of the newsroom when you try to understand how and why the media bubble got so thick. The energy industry leans Republican for many of the same reasons that the news industry leans to the left: location and demographics. I'm not suggesting geographic quotas for newsrooms in addition to the ethnic and gender diversity ones already in place.
And that was the first half of Chapter 3, Bubble Trouble, from Broken News: Why the Media Rage Machine Divides America and How to Fight Back, by Chris Direwalt. Back in a minute. Thank you. The following is one of my voiceover demos. If you're a voiceover artist and you would like to advertise one of your demos on my podcast, please send an MP3 to thedrill12, all one word, at gmail.com. That's thedrill12 at gmail.com. Back in a minute. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Caesar's Palace for 12 rounds of boxing. In the red corner, from Los Angeles, California, wearing the red trunks with the gold trim, weighing in at 125 pounds, the lightweight champion of the world, Danny Little Red Lopez. Well, Bill, our winners get a home theater receiver. That's right. Experience the full potential of high-definition video with this 72-channel digital home theater receiver from Yamaha. But wait, that's not all. They also get a 5.1-channel surround sound system from Mirage. With 5 palm-sized speakers and a compact subwoofer cube, the MX 5.1 brings you huge immersive sound with Mirage's omnipolar technology. All from the Spiegel catalog, Chicago, Illinois, 60609. And they're taking closer order as down the stretch they come. Mr. Hot Stuff has 3 lengths to make up with chocolate candy last. On the rail, take the points behind that gallant son with chocolate candy gaining on the outside. In the lead is Pioneer of the Nile being tackled by chocolate candy. They're neck and neck as they come to the wire. And Pioneer of the Nile holds off chocolate candy and wins the Santa Anita Derby. And now, on your feet, time to greet holder of 14 NBA titles, your home team, your Los Angeles Lakers. Number 3 at 6'8", 5th year out of UCLA, playing forward, Trevor Ariza. Starting at center, number 17 at 7 feet, fourth year out of St. Andrews High School, Andrew Bynum. And at guard, number 24, 6'6", 13th season out of Loyal Marion High School, Kobe Bryant. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there and reminding you that you are not neutral and that the government has no rights.